Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Allie. I'm Dorothy Jean Crochet. Today I'm going to tell you all about my 2023 temperature blanket. This was my first temperature blanket I've ever done. I researched different ways of how to construct one, and I found that the linen stitch square was the best method for me. I love this method for a couple different reasons. One, monthly squares make it super manageable. You're not doing long rows every single day. In fact, your squares that you have when you start are really small. So the first half of the month, you're only working with this really small section. So it's super manageable. It doesn't take up a lot of space. If you get behind, you can catch back up pretty quickly because it's not, you're not making the same amount of stitches every day. Secondly, the ends are super easy to work over. You just crochet over them. You can have ends to weave in. There's always some strays, but majority, if you can remember, most of the time you can just work over all the ends and it makes cleanup super easy at the end when your blanket is finished. Also, each square is super unique. I can't hold this up and show you the entire thing in frame, but it's really fun watching your blanket grow month by month and seeing how each square is different from the last one. It's just kind of this fun, like unpredictable experiment, and you end up with a colorful, like crazy, you never know what you're gonna get type of project when you're all done. And by the end of the year, you're gonna have a pretty decent sized blanket. I blocked each of my monthly squares to 20 by 20 inches. So my final blanket is roughly 60 by 80, give or take. I did add a border, which I'll talk about at the end, that can add a little bit of length, but this fits over my full/queen size bed. It doesn't go over the edge, it just kind of fits like the surface area, but I think it would cover a twin size bed pretty easily. So you get a decent sized blanket. It's not, you know, one long skinny blanket like some temperature blankets end up becoming. Yeah, so let's just jump right in and I'm going to tell you all about it. So before we jump in, I do want to mention I have a fully written guide available on my Etsy that includes all the information that I'm going to talk about in this video. So if you're interested, I'll put a link in the description and you can get that and follow along or just take notes from this video, whatever suits your fancy. It does include principles that you can use to track your temperatures and to keep track of your temperature scale and your yarn colors. So I think it's pretty handy dandy. So I would go check it out. All right, so the year I picked 2023. I just picked the current year. You can always pick a past year, and I think those are even more fun to do because all the temperatures are already recorded. So you can work ahead as fast as you'd like and get that done super duper quick. Like you don't have to wait around for forecasts to come true. Secondly, my range. So I live in South Carolina, I live in the upstate, and so our temperatures can be slightly unpredictable, but usually we don't see below freezing temperatures. We do get snow every once in a while, but it's pretty rare. So I always go below 32 degrees Fahrenheit and then go all the way up to like 90. So anything that's below like 32 or below is one color, and then I have intervals between that all the way up to 90, and then anything hotter than 90 is one color because we don't see a lot of 90 it gets hot here, but I've never seen a triple digit temperature, so I'll just say that. So research your range and pick your year. All right, so the next step is the fun part. It's your color palette. So my color palette for this blanket was fun, groovy 70s colors. So I have lots of pink and orange and brown and green and a yellow and tan and all of that. If you could find it in a 70s decor magazine, I tried to include it. So I think that's the most fun, is like seeing how all the colors that you picked in the beginning interact with each other on the finished blanket. An important thing to note, when you're picking your colors for your scale, you need to consider yarn availability. So if you're going to try to stick within one brand of yarn, you need to research what they have first before you get your heart set on a color palette. If you're comfortable with reaching out into other brands and using other colors from that particular brand, dye lot, etc., go for it. Most of the yarns that I used in this blanket are from Joann's. big twist acrylic value. But I did have to compensate with some yarn colors. If I couldn't find one, I would try to match it as closely as possible. For an example, the red that I have is actually two different reds. I love this yarn red, and then I also had a big twist red, which I couldn't find at the time that I needed, so I had to take it to another store, color match, and be on my way. So sometimes that happens. But the important thing is just look and see what's available first before you get set on a color palette, because it's a little crushing to have your palette determined and then you can't find a color that works. All right, so after you've picked your yarn, double check, make sure it's a number 4 worsted weight acrylic. Now, you can venture out of that zone. It's your blanket. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just suggesting. I find that working with your typical weight 4 acrylic is the easiest way. It's the most available. It's the easiest to find. It has the most variety of colors. It's easy to wash. It's easy to take care of. Whatever. If you want to do something different, you do you. I'm not judging, but that's just my suggestion. I also used a 5.5 millimeter hook for this, and that's how I was able to block each square to 20 by 20 and then have the size blanket that I do at the end, the 60 by 80. You could definitely round down to a 5 or even up to a 6. It just depends on how loosey-goosey you want your fabric to be at the end of your project. So don't forget to take lots of notes of what yarn that you bought. Keep the labels so that you know exactly which one it is when you go back to get more if you need more. Speaking of how much yarn, I would suggest starting with 1 skein per color and maybe 1 or 2 for your border color. It's impossible to know how many skeins you're going to need because you don't know what your weather is going to be like. So if you just start with 1, I found that kind of got me through halfway through the year, and then I could reassess which colors I was using more often and then go buy another skein of those colors. Speaking of colors, I had 12 colors picked for my blanket, so my scale had 12 different degree ranges, and I had 1 color for my border. All right, let's talk about the pattern. So the linen stitch is also known as the moss stitch. It is a single crochet, chain 1 single crochet stitch where you insert your single crochets into the chains from the last row. So you're not crocheting into a stitch, you're crocheting into a chain space. I call these linen stitch squares because that's the stitch I use to make them. I've had some people refer to them as granny squares, and I think that's technically incorrect. You can call it whatever you want, but for me, a granny square is a granny square because it's made with granny stitches. If you want to call every square made in crochet a granny square, that's you. But you can make squares with any differing number of stitches, and that's why I call it this. So I will not be referring to these as granny squares. That's why I refer to them as linen squares or linen stitch squares, because I did not use granny stitches to make them. So I hope that makes sense. Each square is 33 rounds. Why? To account for the differing number of days in each month. So depending on what month it is, I would put 1 or 2 border rows around each one to make it equal to 33. Now, my day 1 of each month is 2 rounds. So months that have 31 days have 1 border row. Months that have 30 days have 2. And for February, you're just gonna have to do the math because she's a wild card. And in fact, I think she's a leap year this next year in 2024. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier. Once your squares are done, you can block them. I feel like this helps really relax the square and get each one even as possible so that when your blanket is done, it's a beautiful even rectangle. Now, but you don't have to do that. To sew them together, I just whip stitch them. You can crochet them together, but I don't like the little ridge seam that can create. I really wanted my blanket to lay flat and even. So you can do that if you want to. I just didn't, but you can do any method that you would prefer. I just think the whip stitch makes it nice and flat. Once they're all sewn together, you can choose to add a border around the entire blanket, which is what I did. I did a little double crochet scallop around the whole thing, and I really think it just kind of finishes it off and makes it really pretty. And the last question that I really liked was, is there anything that you would have done differently? And yes, there is. So initially, when I was first putting my color palette together, I put the colors that I was most excited to work with at the beginning because I wanted to just start with those initially, right off the bat, you know, January, February, March, in those cold temperature ranges. And as I started working, I realized that because I was doing it on kind of like one end of the scale, I wasn't going to revisit these as often, and I wouldn't see them again until the very end of the year. And I ended up working with my median range, of course, more frequently throughout the year because that's why it's called the median average range. So going forward for 2024, my favorite colors are going to be right smack dab in the middle, where I know I'm going to be using them more frequently. And the majority of my blanket will be those colors. That's the only thing I wish I'd done differently. So keep that in mind. Like, if there are colors that you're excited about using, maybe don't put them on one end of the scale because you're not going to revisit those very, very high temps and very, very low temps as frequently as you would the median temperatures of your climate of where you live. All right, that's all I have for you. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was informative and helpful. I tried to include all the information that is also available in my guide that is on my Etsy shop. And it also has printables included if you need something to help you track your temperatures every day. It is super duper helpful. So with that, I wish you a happy new year and happy crocheting, happy temperature blanket making. And if you need any help, please comment below. I love helping. You can message me on Instagram as well, and we can get through this together. I know temperature blankets seem like a daunting project, but this was so easy, and you can do this. If I can do this, you can do this. It really was. It was so manageable, and it's a keepsake, and it's something that I can hand down to my kids or my grandkids. In fact, my 2024 blanket I'm making for my nephew that's coming. He's due in April, and I'm really excited that I'm going to be an aunt. And so next year is all about him, and it's something that I can give to him and he can keep forever. No pressure or anything, but have fun with it. That's the most important part, okay? All right, I'll see you guys around. Please follow me on Instagram if you don't. I post, that's my main, that's my bread and butter. I don't really post anywhere else. Okay, bye. Happy 2024.